it's not my way to go in that direction. There was actually a book that won the National Book Award by James Merrill called The Changing Light at Sandover, which was pretty much written by the Jinn because it was written on a Ouija board, or a lot of it was. And so this is, this is not something that is just in the past. It's something that continues.
Keep watching to learn more. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the nature of the Jinn in Arabic and Middle Eastern cultures, also popularly known in the West as a genie. My guest is Charles Upton, who is the author of many books, including Folk Metaphysics, Mystical Meanings in Traditional Folk Songs and Spirituals, Knowings in the Arts of Metaphysics, Cosmology and the Spiritual Path, The Science of the Greater Jihad, Essays in Principal Psychology, The System of the Antichrist, Truth and Falsehood in Postmodernism and the New Age, The Alien Disclosure Deception, The Metaphysics of Social Engineering, and most recently an autobiography, Giving Myself Away, From Beat Generation Protege to Metaphysical Social Critic, A Cultural History of America Through 50 Years of Spiritual Seeking. Charles has been a guest on New Thinking Aloud many times, and I highly recommend his previous interviews. He's based in Lexington, Kentucky, and now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Charles. It is a pleasure to be with you again.
Yes, glad to get back. Good.
I hope you're well. I know that you've been addressing a serious health condition now for quite a while.
Yeah, well, it seems to be, not flaring, and but as we said earlier, it's costing me a lot to keep, to buy those herbs that are supposedly keeping it down, which they seem to be, Anyway, enough about me.
To begin with, let's talk about the Jinn as it's understood in pre-Islamic culture. I'm pretty sure it's something with many different names found in folklore throughout the world.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I would say, actually, the understanding of the Jinn in pre-Islamic and Islamic culture is pretty much the same. What's the difference is the acceptable relationship of humanity to the Jinn is what changed, not the idea of who the Jinn are. So, the Jinn are pretty much the Arab version of what the Northern Europeans called the fairies, what the Greeks call the daimons, who, are beings somehow between human beings and the gods, an intermediary place, and I think they're very similar to the asuras of the Hindus. And, there's many different colors. I would say that they bear affinities to the Jotun of the Norse, who are the giants, because there's a distinction made between the gods and the giants. In Norse folklore, a giant who was admitted to the company of the gods was Loki, who was obviously a problematic character. And there's a similar thing in Islam, actually in the Quran, which says that Iblis was a jinn who was admitted to the company of the angels. And he was a problematic character. Very similar stuff. So that's what they are. And they're known to have certain powers. They're mostly invisible to us most of the time, yet they can appear, they can temporarily materialize, and they can affect material reality. According to the Quran, the king or prophet Solomon used them as architects and also used them as divers. They could dive to the bottom of the ocean and come up with pearls and things like this. So that's, they're like that. One of their major functions in pre-Islamic Arabia was that the poets of Arabia largely claimed to be inspired by the Jinn. That they were the muses, if you will, of those poets, and which is very interesting. This shows once again the very close relationship of poetry to magic traditionally. In fact, I'm sometimes known as a poet, and I once had an experience where the Jinn appeared to me in a dream, and they said, we will make you, if you throw in your lot with us, we will make you, the most famous poet in the world, and we will give you long, long epics that you can write. And they actually gave me a sample of their wares, which was this line. They said, "Their great sapphire searchlights sweeping the giant dead." And I said, "You want more of that? You could have whole epics full of that, And I said, "Well, I don't think so. It's not my way to go in that direction." There was actually a book that won the National Book Award by James Merrill called The Changing Light at Sandover, which was pretty much written by the Jinn because it was written on a Ouija board, or a lot of it was. And so this is, this is not something that is just in the past. It's something that continues. But the change was, well, the change is talked about in the Quran. The Quran tells the story of before the Quran descended to humanity, which means, the human race was now once again in direct contact with Allah directly through His words. He was not at a distance as, he had seemed to be before. And so what the Jinn used to do is they would fly up to some higher plane and they would eavesdrop on the counsels of Allah and His angels. And they would get information from that. Then they would fly down to the human beings who were in touch with them and relate that information, which reminds me very much of channeling and spirit mediumship today, pretty much the same phenomenon. But when the Quran came and says, well, now Allah is speaking directly, so, you Jinn are out of a job as intermediaries. You used to be intermediaries, and that was acceptable for a while, but now, we're getting it from the horse's mouth, so you will not be needed in this role. And then they would try to fly up, and do what they did before, but they were driven away by meteors. So the idea in the Quran is meteors represent as if the spears of the angels, being thrown down to drive the Jinn back, so they can no longer listen in on what's going on in heaven.
So you can speak about the jinn both from personal experience and in terms of the both the classical literature, the Quranic literature, and the folk literature of the Middle East.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've read some accounts of the folk literature, but basically the accounts are this is the role that the jinn had in pre-Islamic Arabia, which is, you know, I know pretty much what that is. In terms of personal experience, yeah, I mean, I now personally, and this is something that some Islamic scholars will agree with and some will not, I have a very wide-angle definition of the jinn. You know, there are a lot of invisible beings in this universe. You know, it's Sasquatch is even appearing as a paranormal cryptid who can dematerialize. You know, his tracks are moving in a certain direction across an open area of sand, and then they just disappear. You know, where did he go? So there's a whole realm of beings who they're not material like we are. But they're not strictly angelic, you know, and it's difficult for people nowadays to get an intuitive feeling of the difference between the angelic and the world of the jinn, because I don't know why it is. Perhaps because traditional religions are losing a certain amount of their influence. But it's all I can say is, take it from me, they're different. You know, if you will, the angels sometimes will appear as if they are solid light, whereas the jinn will sometimes appear in a haze of pixie dust or little sparkly particles. You know, that's just one way of making a distinction. It's not a hard and fast way, but they're different. They're different, and so. Yeah, and in my own experience, I suppose, I mean, I remember a dream I had once where the jinn had appeared in these old-fashioned Victorian airships, you know, it was like, you know, it's like that's kind of they like that style. They used to appear like that a lot, and now once in a while they still like to do it, like people who like to drive classic cars, you know, they have this thing. So, but yeah, they're different. And probably my main experience with the powers of the jinn was with the psychic surgeons of the Philippines, which, you know, I have an account of my meetings with them in the Philippines and also in California in my autobiography, Giving Myself Away, which has recently been published. And the psychic surgeons, now I know there have been problematic psychic surgeons. There have been fakes. You know, John of God was apparently pretty much a fake. And sometimes, as with a lot of spirit mediums, you will find people who have those powers once in a while, or sometimes they could do it, or once they could do it. But now, since they're known as that kind of, you know, white magician, or whether they have to come up with some phenomenon on call, and so they learn to fake it half the time when their power isn't working. You know, this is one thing that happens. But the ones that I met in the Philippines, I don't know. They certainly convinced me. You know, they could reach right into your body and pull out God knows what foreign material, and the incision immediately closes up. There may be a little pain, a few drops of blood, and then no problem, and no clear after effect, except on a psychic plane. And what they did when I was there, there was a little seminar that they gave to get you ready for what was going on. And it was basically on spiritualism. And they were using as their authority Allan Kardec in his writings. So, but most of the psychic surgeons are Christians. They claim they're working with the power of the Holy Spirit. But obviously, what they're doing is an ancient shamanic technique, which became Christianized at one point, And they work with spirit helpers who give them the power to temporarily dematerialize the human body and remove, problematic energies or substances, And so it happened many times. I saw other people be worked on. I was worked on, it just happened so much, I couldn't deny it. So.
But you seem to feel that the jinns are involved.
Well, yeah, that's what I would say, because it didn't give me the feeling of, for example, a miracle. Now, a miracle is not just a paranormal event. It's the dawning of a truth. From a higher plane, a truth comes. God sends a truth, God sends a teaching in very concrete terms. And the truth is so powerful that it has physical reverberations. And various things happen. But it accomplishes many different things at the same time on different levels. This is what you feel when you're experiencing a miracle. Whereas the feeling of the psychic surgeons is, well, this is an ancient technology that was developed by people before they had our kind of mechanistic technology, so they had to do something, and this is what they came up with, and with the help of spirit physicians or spirit guides, whatever they are, who I would class as the jinn. Now, the jinn, and this goes back to the Muslim doctrine of the jinn are not just demons. Some of them are demons, but it's made very clear in the Quran that some of the jinn are faithful. Some of them actually follow the Quran. The Quran is described as a book sent to men and jinn. So some jinn are Muslim and follow the Quran. Others rejected it, or actually others are thought of as being Christian jinn or Jewish jinn, who have their own revelations, But those who do not follow any of the revelations of God are pretty much classed as demons, or what Christians would call demons. Now, Christians have a very useful idea of demons in terms of what is learned through, Catholic exorcism and things like this. And there's a lot of truth to them. I just think they would do well to have a little wider angle view of what the world of the invisible beings who are not angels are. And, there's in the name of prudence, they will say, angels are sent by God, but demons are something else, because you don't want to go in that demonic direction. And I would say that most Sufis would say that it's not particularly healthy to deal with the jinn, even the faithful Muslim jinn, because their world is very fascinating. It's very diverting, it's, you can get hooked to wanting to look into the world of the jinn and see what they know and all of this. And this interrupts your direct contemplation of God. Even if they're not evil, they're fascinating, and we don't need that kind of fascination if we want to have one-pointed concentration on God.
You could say the same thing, I imagine, about other human beings as well. You can become fascinated by a person, let's say, from a different culture.
Yeah, the jinn and movie stars have a lot of affinities, I guess. Yeah, you could. Yeah, I mean, there are people who are entirely, well-intentioned and, have a certain degree of wisdom and this, but if you give yourself over to them in the wrong way, you will turn something that could be a fruitful relationship into something that's ultimately toxic. There are a lot of spiritual teachers who have been turned into false gurus by their followers, and, they got to watch out for that. It's interesting to talk about the Jinn now because I think there's so much in evidence. There is a reason to talk about them besides just fascination and curiosity. I think we need to accept the reality. We need to accept that even if all of them are not demons, because some of them certainly are. I mean, there's a whole Muslim spiritual science called Ruqya, which is Muslim exorcism. And, in order to deal with the Jinn, it's very similar to the Catholic practice of exorcism dealing with demons. So they're pretty much the same beings to the point where they obsess us or possess us, Yet there are other ones, I would say that there are the nature spirits, the beings that Peter and Eileen Caddy encountered at Findhorn, they can't be called demons. I mean, these are beings who help the trees grow, What's wrong with that? What is wrong, though, is we get too fascinated with them. And what happens, I remember, this is a story I tell in my autobiography. So I was with a Sufi order, Ni'matullahi order that hails from Persia, from Iran, and they had a place, a Hanukkah or lodge in San Francisco. And while I was, doing my spiritual practices there twice a week, I had met with some of the psychic surgeons from the Philippines who traveled to California, and they worked on me. And then I told my spiritual advisor, I had this dream, is what it is. I dreamt that out of somewhere like northern China came this huge black cube. It was like the ship of the Borg from Star Trek: The Next Generation, and it was like an inverted satanic Kaaba, and this was the Antichrist, and it had come, and I had this dream just after going to the psychic surgeons. I told this to my spiritual advisor and said, "Do you think it's possible that you might be able to stop seeing these people?" He was very nice. He says, "Maybe this isn't the best idea," And so I said, "Okay." And from that, I got the feeling that the psychic plane is becoming so polluted nowadays that what might have been spiritually helpful in earlier ages or even in earlier decades is now getting a little dangerous, and maybe at least for me, I shouldn't mess with that anymore. So I didn't.
Well, I know in one of our previous interviews, you talked about the idea that we are living in an era in which the veil that separates us from the world of, the world of the Jinn, that veil is being opened, and so all sorts of things are pouring in.
Yeah, that is true, and that's I get a lot of that from René Guénon, who talks about the Great Wall. There's a story in the Quran that a being called Dhul Qarnayn, which I think means the two-horned one, and nobody knows who. Some identify that with Alexander the Great, some even with Moses, because Moses, if you'll remember, when he came down from Sinai, had two horns of light coming from his head, which, interestingly enough, is something I saw in one of those Tibetan tankas or Buddha paintings, exactly that same thing. So it has something to do with a very deep psychophysical something. Anyway, but Dhul Qarnayn went to the east, and he built a huge wall out of iron and brass and stuff to keep, the forces of Gog and Magog out. But then there's the story that somewhere, I forget where this is, that this wall is going to break. It won't last forever. It's going to break down. And psychedelic drugs and the internet and artificial intelligence. I mean, if there aren't things that are opening the door to the invisible world to directly interact with our world, this is everywhere. This is what, you know, I mean, if we don't even know how artificial intelligence works, you know, it's doing something, we say, my God, you know, I always felt that our computers, a lot of our technology, our computers, the internet, were inspired in scientists by the Jinn, so that they could, with the help of human scientists, create, as it were, a body for themselves in this world, so they could operate in this world. And I mean, I've seen weird, for example, there was a picture I saw created by AI, and no one, this was not something that was being remarked upon. Somebody said, look, here's a picture of the AI created of Jesus and the Virgin Mary and this, you know. And I looked, and the child Jesus had a distorted, weird, distorted looking eye. And it was either the Virgin Mary or some other figure had 6 fingers on his hand. And you just said, this is sinister. You know, this is like what you would do if you wanted to sacrilegiously parody a sacred image. Now, was that just accidental? Possibly. Maybe not.
Well, you have talked in previous interviews about how UFO phenomena, in your view, are largely associated with the Jinn, and that from your point of view, the interactions reported between human beings and entities associated with UFOs is very often highly negative.
Well, it is. I mean, recently I've been listening to the many videos of Preston Dennett, who in each video will tell 10 amazing stories of people encountering aliens. And he even had a series where it says, you know, send me the name of your hometown and I will find UFO apparitions in your hometown that weren't even reported outside. And generally he could do it anywhere in the world. So he's giving an idea of the incredible prevalence of this stuff. But secondly, he is showing that they assume so many different shapes, that the idea that they're coming from other planets, they're coming from 370 different planets right to our planet, you know, and you know, both their actual number of apparitions in the many thousands upon thousands upon thousands, and the incredible range of forms that they appear in, both argue against their being from other planets coming here in spaceships. These are the powers of the Jinn. The Jinn are shapeshifters. They can appear in any number of forms. And it's so much easier and more elegant to say, well, they're as if the Jinn are a part of nature, they're like the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the Jinn kingdom. You know, that they're another kind of being that exists in our world. They're not always visible, usually not visible, but they can appear to us and temporarily materialize. And you know, that's so much easier explanation than trying to come up with technological, far-fetched technological explanations of how they would have anti-gravity drives and how they would exceed the speed of light and use wormholes, which we don't even know exist, and all that, you know, that's an example of the epicycles of our time. Just, you know, trying to hold on to a particular paradigm by getting more and more arcane and complicated. Whereas if you just say, wait a minute, these are natural phenomena of a level that in the past few hundred years we've forgotten about, but all of the rest of human history is known about. Let's just leave it at that, you know, and you know, operate on that basis, and we'll get a lot farther. Yeah, so I had some young Muslims who were studying, the Jinn and UFOs contact me, and we had a communication, and they were saying, well, we won't say that it's impossible that these could be from other planets coming here in spaceships, but as far as we've seen so far, everything that is attributable to the Jinn has been attributed to the UFO aliens. They have the same powers, to appear, to disappear, to travel at vast speeds, to shapeshift. Oh, and they can affect matter. Now, my question to them was, well, now, of course, we've heard of the alien corpses and the crashed UFOs for decade after decade after decade, and they have not been produced. I could phone my senator and say, or write him an email and say, why don't you demand to see one of these things? And he'll go, if he already knows what will happen if he tries, but he'll say, well, I'm sorry they wouldn't let me see it. Well, okay, how long? All we've seen, as far as I know, are pieces of material which seem to be not the kind of thing that would normally be produced on Earth, which have, a metal which have a different balance of isotopes, magnesium with different, so they must be from somewhere else. No one has proved to me that those couldn't be produced in order to convince people that we have materially crashed spaceships. Anyway, but on the other hand, these Muslims I was talking to, I said, well, look, what I want to know is if a Jinn, assumes a bodily form and then is killed, dies, will that form remain, as a corpse on Earth, or will it dematerialize again? And they say sometimes it will remain. Now that's what they say. And exactly their credentials I do not know. But one of my Sufi brothers, who used to travel a lot to Indonesia and Malaysia, where a lot of this kind of activity goes on, working with the Jinn. In fact, the Philippine psychic surgeons, I would consider that to be the same culture area, where there's an awful lot of work with the Jinn. And he had some friends there who showed him a kris, one of those really cruel dagger things that the Malays will use. And they would say, well, this was an object produced by the Jinn. And, it's been in our family for generations. And the Jinn produced it. And so what he would do, which I don't recommend, is once a year he would do some kind of ritual around it, and he would sharpen it and do something and talk to the Jinn, and keep connection between him and the Jinn, because the idea is if you keep a Jinn on your side, that you'll have good luck and this kind of thing, which, I don't know.
I am under the impression that the Quran tries to prohibit people engaging in propitiation of the Jinn.
Oh, certainly, yeah, because that is shirk. That is treating them as if they are gods. And through there it says, the Jinn have no power to benefit you or themselves unless Allah wills. So why not, apply directly to Allah? Forget, So yeah, I forget. Was it Amidou Bamba? It might have been. There was an African Sufi who, wrote something and said, well, if you're going to, become a Muslim, you need to give up your protectors. And people are getting protectors like that now. I mean, people, have spirit guides and that they feel, can protect them and teach them and guide them. And, it seems to me, if one is truly on the way, really loves truth, believes in God, is on the way to God, to coming closer to God, and at one point, one doesn't know any better than to do some kind of New Age religion, it's not necessarily all evil, because the beings that appear on your way to God, maybe you can't believe in God or feel you can contact him directly right now, but you can believe in something like a spirit guide or a guardian angel. So, and it's possible that the beings who appear at that point will be helpful if they say, look beyond me, to my source, look beyond me to our Lord, whereas if you've come into the field of direct relationship with God, and then you decide you want to go back and have some dealings with the spirit guides and the Jinn, then you're in real trouble, because that is shirk, and you're putting lesser beings in the place of God, and that is always very dangerous and very destructive.
On the other hand, I'm sure you can appreciate that many people would say that what we're really talking about are figments of the subconscious mind.
Well, yeah, but the subconscious mind is enough of a mystery to, who knows what the subconscious mind can do? I mean, apparently, some people who are going through puberty, which is a psychophysical change, obviously can have a poltergeist manifestations around them because of the powerful energy they're putting out. Or the Tibetans will do something called a tulpu, where they will visualize a particular being, and they visualize it to the point where it will materialize more or less and appear to other people. So this is the subconscious mind, or working with the powers of the mind. What is the mind?
Well, would you say that a Tibetan tulpu, which is deliberately created by the human operator, is the same as a Jinn?
I don't think so. No, I was just simply addressing, what you said. Some people say these are figments of the subconscious. No, I mean the Jinn are there just like geese and deer and Jinn. They're really out there.
Well, as a poet, you've talked about the Jinn coming to you in a dream and offering poetic inspiration. How would you separate that instance out from something going on within your own subconscious mind?
Well, certainly they were operating. If they came into a dream, you could say the subconscious mind was involved. Yeah. One could, as it is with demons in Catholic exorcism, the exorcist has to make a distinction between, something like schizophrenia or multiple personality disorder and actual possession. But there are criteria whereby to do that. There are certain external manifestations or certain powers that the human being will develop, will manifest that are just, are not normal to the human being, which indicate the possession of the presence of a possessing demon. So you'd have to bring in another set of criteria and evidence before I could tell you that this was actually the Jinn, proof positive rather than my unconscious. But that's how they appeared. They announced themselves as that, is all I know.
Well, it does seem as if you're suggesting that Jinns have certain abilities, powers that humans have, like the use of language, but they also have powers that we don't have.
Yeah, or that we don't generally have. Maybe we can develop similar powers. Similar powers have been attributed to very advanced yogis and things like this. But talk about language. Language is their forte. They are the masters of language. I certainly understand why the pre-Islamic poets would take the Jinn as their inspirers, because they have that power.
Do you think we can relate the jinn to some of the entities referred to in, for example, Greek mythology?
Yeah, well, like I said, the daimons are the jinn, and it's so hard to tell what the gods were to the Greeks. My belief is that all religions start as a kind of monotheism or a sense of the unity of being. And then, speaking in more Muslim terms, you would say, there's Allah and his attributes and his names. And his names are not parts of Allah. As Ibn al-Arabi said, the names of Allah are his relationships to various parts of creation, various created beings. Those are his names. They're not parts of him. They're his relationships to the multitude of the things he's created. But a point can come where the intuition, the sense of the reality of Allah or of absolute reality becomes veiled progressively, and then the various attributes or names of absolute reality become, at that point, progressively personified. And they become more plausible. Zeus is sort of what was left of absolute reality, but obviously by the time you get the Greek mythology that's come down to us, Zeus is just another one of the gods, another one of those beings. He's probably bigger and tougher than all the rest of them, but still, his wife can knock him for a loop, or somebody can do something that makes him mad behind his back, and he gets even. And it's obviously, this is not really the absolute qua absolute anymore. And then, so the Neoplatonists came along and or the Platonists and Neoplatonists had to come along and talk about the one, in abstract terms. That some would identify with Zeus, but it was obviously they're trying to go back to a more, a more absolute conception of the absolute. So we don't know what the gods were. The Christians say all the pagan gods are really demons, which is may have become true at a certain point. Like the jinn after the Quran descended, the jinn became necessarily more evil when they, in order to maintain their earlier function with the human race, they had to rival the Quran. And so you don't need the Quran, you've got us. Now they're standing more directly against God, and so they're becoming more demonic. And so there's a tendency in religion for monotheism to slowly devolve into polytheism. So at what point, I don't know if you would call, the Greek gods the jinn. It's actually more accurate to the way the Greeks thought of it is that they are the higher beings. And, Neoplatonists like Iamblichus would consider them to be the personifications of the Platonic intelligibles, the Platonic ideas. And he would do theurgy to invoke the gods on that level because they are units of transcendental meaning. So that's so if the gods are considered that, then it's the daimons who are on a lower echelon, than the gods, and at one point act as intermediaries between human beings and the gods. At the Delphic Oracle used to be basically the being that the Delphic priestesses were consulting was the Python. Whatever the Python was, that's where they got their prophecies from. Then Apollo came, and a god from the north, from Hyperborea, a sun god, and he conquered the Delphic Oracle and says, I am now the lord of this oracle. But the Python was still allowed to exist, but he was on a lower level, So you could say Apollo is the god, Python is the daimon, that's still an intermediary between the priestess and the god, something like that, in very general terms. So it's a very ambiguous world, but certainly the Greeks understood that there was a realm of beings lesser than the gods, but greater than humanity. That was the daimones.
There's certainly a sense that you've been describing, particularly in the Tale of Solomon, that the jinn are capable of performing useful tasks for humans.
Yeah, well, actually, though, the story of Solomon is he was the last prophet who was given the right and the commission to work with the jinn. He was the last one. And after Solomon, no more. And that's what the Quran says.
I know in the magical tradition there are many grimoires involving, the keys of Solomon and the rituals associated with Solomon.
If only we could find Solomon's ring with the seal of Solomon on it. Boy, that would, But I guess it was thrown into Mount Doom and we will not see it again.
So the jinn are often associated with various magical practices.
Oh, yeah. Magicians will work with the jinn. And not every magician in all places and times will cop to that. But they do. Magicians like to think that the power is their own. Or if they're working with the jinn or with the demons, that they have dominated the demons. I mean, Renaissance magic in the in Christendom had a very funny rationale. Basically, they said, well, Christ has conquered the kingdom of Satan and his demons, and we're Christians and we're followers of Christ. Therefore, we have a right to make the demons our slaves because they've been conquered. So, what a Renaissance magician, according to certain systems, would do, even though some of what he was doing was probably descended from Neoplatonic theurgy and things like this, but it was Christianized. And so he would say, well, I will fast and pray and purify myself, and then I will invoke angels, and the angels will give me the power to control the demons. And the demons will go and find treasure for me, or bring me the woman I want, or whatever. But it's all Christian. It's all good, What happens very often when a magician is working with some being who will be one of the darker jinn or one of the demons, is that demon will say, God, you're so powerful. You conquered me. Your wish is my command, Effendi, and whatever you want, and he says, well, okay, go do this for me and that for me. And this is all a deception because the jinn or the demon is trying to convince the magician of what he wants to believe anyways, as he's the one with the power, whereas actually every time the magician commands the demon is actually getting more power over the magician. So that's what happens.
I suppose in our era, especially here in the United States, people's notion of the jinn is largely conditioned by Disney's story of Aladdin and his magic lamp and this wonderful song and dance number where the genie says, I'm the best friend you ever had.
The same people that see problems with Harry Potter, are seeing problems with that. This is conditioning kids to think that magic is fun and games, and it's all Disney. The worst you'll encounter is Walt Disney. You'll never have to encounter Aleister Crowley. But I'm increasingly thinking that it's not good to go in that direction.
Well, you seem very concerned about the what some people who are in the skeptical community, hardcore left-wing rationalists would say, the danger that we're facing is the rising tide of superstition. And I think you're equating that with the rising tide of occultism.
Well, I mean, superstition is a very wide-angle and vague term. I mean, is belief in God superstition? You know, the hardcore rational leftist would say so. You know, I accept the invisible world, the world of angels, jinn, demons, and God knows what, as a sober fact. So if so, I am absolutely superstitious in every conceivable way. But, you know, once I accept that, then there's certain distinctions have to be made.
So what you're suggesting, if I understand it correctly, is that since monotheistic cultures have arisen, any spiritual focus that is forgetful about the one source that connects us all can be misleading and dangerous.
Yeah, forgetful. I mean, it's like, these beings appear. I mean, you might be walking in the forest and see a beautiful, which I used to do deliberately, you know, and to see a beautiful elemental or, you know, tree spirit or something. And if you immediately say, oh my God, it's a demon, I've got to go confess to the priest. I mean, that's going a little too far. But if the beautiful elemental says, come with me into my world, look more deeply into my world, I'm in love with you, you know, that's where the problem begins. You know, you can't just be so puritanical that any manifestation like that makes you feel like you've committed some crime. But, you know, you have to understand the danger of the fascination for even the less toxic aspects of the invisible world. You know, you have to understand what the human mandate is what the Quran calls the trust, or the amana. You know, the Quran says, Allah is speaking, we offered the trust to the heavens, the earth, and the hills, but they shrank from it and were afraid of it, and man assumed it. And then it says, lo, he hath proved a tyrant and a fool. You know, but in other words, we have a mandate, we have a responsibility as human beings, which is to maintain the sense, the intuition of the absolute and communication with the absolute for the benefit of the entire terrestrial plane. That's our job. And something that diverts us from that is no good because, you know, our duty has been laid down, our work is cut out for us, and if we don't follow it, then too bad for us.
Charles Upton, once again, a fascinating, insightful conversation. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I'm looking forward to future interviews where we'll delve more deeply into your autobiography, Giving Myself Away.
Me. My favorite subject, yes. Actually, it's not. It was hard to talk about me, but my Sufi brothers said you got to do it, and so I did it.
So thank you so much once again for being with me and the New Thinking Aloud audience.
Glad to be here.
And for those of you watching or listening, thank you for being with us because you are the reason that we are here. For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu. You can now download all 8 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.